At 4:47 in the morning, Simone Holloway unlocked the door to Prep Room B and found a man bleeding on her floor. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She pressed her hands down on the wound because 6 years of working with knives had taught her that some things need to be stopped before they can be saved. And she talked. She talked the way she always talked when she needed
Stay
to keep
with me.
something alive.
Keep your
About
eyes open.
nothing.
You're gonna be
About
okay.
everything. Just
Just
words,
breathe.
moving through the dark, giving the silence something to push against. Her daughter Nina, 4 years old and never supposed to be there, climbed onto the man's chest, not because anyone told her to, because he was cold. And Nina understood. The way children understand things adults have forgotten. That warmth is not something you save for later. His pulse, which 3 doctors would later describe as inconsistent with continued survival, steadied within the hour. The most feared man in Chicago was kept alive that morning by a woman who refused to let go and a 4-year-old who had no idea she was supposed to be afraid of him. Neither of them knew who he was. He would spend the next 18 mornings learning who they were. If this already has your attention, hit that like button right now. Drop your city and your local time in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story reaches. And subscribe if you haven't, because what happens over those 18 mornings? The wall, the notebook, the knock that changed everything, is not a story you want to walk into halfway. The meeting at the Brayburn Club ended at 2:14 in the morning. It was the kind of meeting that had no minutes, no agenda, no record of who had been in the room. The kind that happened in private lounges, behind unmarked doors, where the only people who knew you were there were the people who had arranged for you to be there. Kang Do-yoon left through the side exit at 2:19. His driver was waiting on the service road, engine running, lights off. The way he always waited, patient, precise, because 12 years in this world had taught both of them that precision was the difference between going home and not. Luck ran out at 2:23. 3 shots. The first took the driver before Do-hyun registered the sound. The second went wide. The third did not. Not random, not opportunistic. Planned, with the kind of geometry that required someone who knew exactly which exit he would use, how many seconds it would take him to reach the car, and which angle left the least room for error. The vehicle drifted into the barrier pole on Kenton Avenue at 2:31 a.m. Impact speed 34 miles per hour. Do-hyun did not lose consciousness immediately. He lost it in pieces, which was worse. The last thing he registered before the dark took over was not pain and not fear. It was a list. Short, specific. The names of the people who had known about that exit. He had built 12 years of careful infrastructure around the understanding that information was the only real currency in his world. Not money, not territory, not the particular reputation that made men step aside when he walked into a room. Information. Who knew what? Who knew when? Who could trace a decision back to the moment it was made, and the mouth that had made it? The list he was composing in those last seconds of consciousness was short. It had to be short. Too short, which meant someone had managed an access point he had not accounted for, which meant the leak was not careless, but deliberate, which meant this was not the end of something but the beginning. He filed it. He held it. The dark took him before he finished. He had been in the dark before. It was the only constant he had known long enough to trust. His men found the car within 4 minutes. The hospital was not an option. Public emergency rooms meant police reports of sorts, which meant names on record, which meant Victor Liang would know he had survived and know exactly where he was before morning. Private facilities meant documentation that could be traced. Both options were eliminated before anyone finished the sentence. Park Min-soo made the call. He knew Hansung Market the way he knew most things in the North Side. Not from any map, but from years of understanding which buildings had service entrances and which service entrances opened onto rooms that did not appear on public floor plans. Prep Room B was cold, windowless, and positioned far enough from the street that no sound would travel. The lock on the service door took 37 seconds to get through. They placed Do-hyun on the floor at 2:58 a.m. Min-soo stood in the doorway and looked at him. His face registered nothing, not because there was nothing there, but because 15 years in this world had trained him to keep whatever was there somewhere it couldn't be used against him. He left one man inside. He walked back down the service hallway to call the private physician. He did not look back. What it cost him to not look back was something Min-soo would not examine until much later, in a different room under different circumstances. He had been with Do-hyun since the man was 20 years old, long enough to remember what he had looked like before the architecture went up, before the systematic suppression of every register that could be read and used. The man on the floor in Prep Room B was the closest Min-soo had seen to that version in over a decade. Unguarded, exposed. Still in a way that was not the stillness of control, but the stillness of a body at its limit. He walked faster down the hallway. He made the calls that needed to be made, in the order they needed to be made, with the efficiency that had kept him useful for 15 years. He did not let himself feel the weight of the evening until he was sitting in the car outside waiting for the physician, and even then he only allowed it briefly. The specific grief of watching someone you have followed into fire, discover that fire this time had found its angle. Then he put it away. There was work. There was always work. That was the arrangement they had both made long ago, in rooms much smaller than this one. Simone Holloway had been opening Hansung Market at 4:47 in the morning. For 6 years. Not 4:45, not 5. 4:47, because it took her 11 minutes from the service entrance to a working station, and the first wholesale order needed to leave by 7:30. She had timed it once, years ago. She had never needed to time it again. She put her key in the lock. She reached for the light switch in Prep Room B. The man on her floor came into visibility in stages, boots first. Then the shape of him, broad across the shoulders, physically dense in a way the stillness couldn't erase. Then, the blood, which had spread in the slow, patient way that blood spreads when it has been there for some time. She stood in the doorway for 3 seconds. Not shock. Assessment. Then she crossed the room and knelt beside him. 6 years of working with knives meant she understood wounds the way other people understood weather. Not from books, but from her hands. From what happened when things went wrong, and she was the only person in the room. She pressed her palms down. She reached behind her without looking and pulled the first aid kit from the shelf by memory. And she talked. She did not call 911. She stood. In the fast, practical way she understood most things, why she did not call 911. There were men in this building who had not been here yesterday. The lock on the service door had been compromised and resecured in a way that was not the work of a burglar. The man on her floor was not a random victim of street violence. The quality of his clothes, the specific nature of the wound, the fact that someone had already partially stabilized him before she arrived, all of this communicated a situation that police involvement would not improve and might make significantly worse. She did not know his world. She knew enough to understand that his world had rules, and that those rules were not hers to navigate on his behalf. So she did what she could do. She pressed down. She talked. Because that was what she did when she needed to keep something alive. She had learned it the first time she cut herself badly. 23 years old, alone in this room, pressing a dish towel against her palm and telling herself, talking means breathing. Breathing means still here. I don't know who you are. Right now, that doesn't matter. You're bleeding on my floor, and what I need you to do is look at that light up there. Right there, don't look anywhere else. Just keep looking at it. Nina was there because Mrs. Grace had called at 8 the previous evening. Her back, she said. She was sorry. She couldn't take the girl. There was no one else. There was never anyone else, and this was the fact that Simone kept carefully off her face and out of her voice, because it was the kind of fact that, if you let people see it, became something they could use. She had made a small bed for Nina behind the far counter using the folded moving blankets kept for cold weather deliveries. Nina had been asleep since 10. She was not asleep now. The child appeared in the prep room B doorway, holding the stuffed rabbit she carried everywhere, looking at her mother and then at the man on the focused and then at the man on the floor. Fun-fode. With focused, uncomplicated attention of a 4-year-old who has not yet learned that certain situations are supposed to produce fear before curiosity. She walked across the room and lay down on his chest. Nina. Simone said her name the way she said it when she meant it. Nina did not move. He's cold, Mama, said as information, as a fact that explained a decision already made, not a decision still under consideration. Do Hyun's pulse, which the private physician would later describe, carefully, as inconsistent with sustained survival, steadied within the hour. Not suddenly, in the gradual, quiet way that things stabilize when they locate something to hold on to. When Min-soo returned with the physician at 4:19 a.m., he stopped in the doorway. Simone was still kneeling beside the man, one hand maintaining pressure, resting on the child's back. Nina had fallen back asleep on the stranger's chest. Simone had made the sleep on the stranger's chest. Simone had made the fast, practical. That warmth was functioning, and her daughter was not in danger. And there were things you did not disturb when they were working. Min-soo looked at the woman, at the child, at the monitors his man had managed to set up against the far wall. Simone looked up. He needs a real doctor. This bought him maybe 20 minutes. Don't waste them. Her hands were steady. There was blood on her apron and on the backs of her wrists, and she was the calmest person in the room by a significant margin. Min-soo looked at the physician. Go, he said. In her coat pocket, folded in thirds, was a notice from KCP Management. Rent increase $2,847 to $3,994 per month, effective in 31 days. Her savings held $4,100. She had submitted 3 written objections. None had received a response. Son. She had been carrying the notice for 9 days because putting it somewhere permanent made it real, and she had not yet decided what to do with real. She had done the math so many times the numbers had stopped meaning numbers and started meaning something else. The particular weight of a figure that sat just past the edge of possible. For $100 in savings, $3,994 in rent, which left $106 to absorb every other cost that existed between this moment and the first of the following month. Nina's shoes, a full size too small, the back tooth that had been bothering her daughter for 11 days, and the $220 the dentist had quoted before insurance, which had lapsed in October. The math was not complicated. It was just very, very specific in what it was telling her. She pushed it further into her pocket and kept her hands where they were. What no one in that room knew, what Simone herself did not know, was that the man bleeding on her floor owned the building she was kneeling in. His company had generated that notice. His company had not read her letters. In the weeks that followed, lying in the room directly next door with nothing but a wall between them, he would hear her read every single draft out loud. Min-soo came to her the following morning. Not at 4:47. He waited until the market opened. Until the first delivery trucks had come and gone, and the regular noise of commerce was enough to cover a quiet conversation near the back. Simone had already understood, a man who thought in those terms. The arrangement was straightforward. $900 per week, cash, in an envelope left in the supply locker she indicated. She continued her normal schedule without variation. She did not mention the situation to other vendors, market staff, or any person outside the building. If asked about sounds from the loading area, the answer was ongoing maintenance. And if something happens to him? Min-soo looked at her with the flat, measuring expression she had already cataloged as his default. Someone will be here within 3 minutes of any alert. That's not what I asked. A pause. Controlled and brief. Nothing will happen to him. Simone looked at the number on the paper. She thought about the notice still in her coat pocket. She thought about Nina's school shoes, which were a full size too small, and the back tooth that had been bothering her daughter for 11 days, and the $220 the pediatric dentist had quoted her. She thought about the 3 letters written to a company that had not written back. Okay, she said. She put the paper away. She went back to work. The first morning she talked to him, she did not know she was doing it. Day 3. Morning prep, trimming, portioning, setting the cold case, and she was talking the way she always talked when she was alone in prep room B out loud, to the room, to no particular destination. 6 years of early mornings had made it a habit she no longer noticed herself doing. Nina asked me last night why Chicago doesn't have stars like in her books, she said, running a knife down the line of a short rib. I told her it's the light. The city puts out so much light the stars can't compete. She said that wasn't fair. She turned the cut. She was right. The wall between prep room B and the loading dock room was approximately 4 inches of drywall and insulation. Standard construction for a building converted from warehouse use in 1987. Sound traveled through it the way sound travels through old buildings. Not clearly, but enough. Day 5. She read the 3rd draft of her letter to KCP management aloud while trimming brisket. Day 7, she told no one in particular that Nina had named all the fish in the display case and refused to let customers buy the one she'd named Gerald. Day 9, the tooth, the dentist, the $220 she did not have. Alec. Day 4, she had talked to us about her grandmother. Not intentionally. She had been cutting, and the radio had played something old, and her hands had slowed for a moment without her permission. And she had said, half to herself, my grandmother used to say you could tell a person's whole life from their hands. Not palm reading, just how they hold things, whether they grip or whether they carry. She had picked up her pace again. I think about that more than I should. Day 6, she had talked about the scholarship she hadn't finished applying for. The nursing program, 2 years, nights and weekends. She had been 3 weeks from completing the application when the childcare situation collapsed, and the timing made the whole thing impossible. And she had folded the paperwork and put it in the kitchen drawer, where paperwork went to stop being a decision. It's still in there, she said. I don't open that drawer anymore. I'm not sure if that's smart or if I'm just protecting something that's already gone. A pause in the cutting. Nina asked me last week what I wanted to be when I grew up. I told her I was already grown up. She said that wasn't an answer. Another pause. She was right about that too. Day 8, nothing remarkable. She had talked about the weather, about a difficult wholesale order, about the specific frustration of a refrigeration unit that ran 3 degrees warmer than its setting. Small things. The accumulated weight of an ordinary working life. And on the other side of 4 inches of drywall, in the gradual half-consciousness of a man fighting his way back from somewhere very far away, those small things had arrived like a frequency being tuned. Not the content, the consistency. The fact of a voice that came back, morning after morning, without agenda. She did not know she was talking to him. She thought she was talking to the room. The dark was not empty. This was what the wall could not communicate. That, on the other side of it, consciousness had been arriving in intervals. Brief. Unreliable. Like a signal through interference. But there, teared. He heard her before he understood what he was hearing. The voice came every morning. Female. Not clinical. Not distressed. Not performing any function he could identify. Speaking in the particular register of someone who had stopped protecting what they said because they believed no one was listening. He caught fragments. A child's name. Something about stars being unfair. A letter that kept starting over. A grandmother and hands, and the way you could read a life from them. A scholarship folded in a drawer. A fish named Gerald that was not to be purchased. He held on to them the way a hand holds on to something when the rest of the body is underwater, and the hand is the only part still in air. By day 9, he understood 3 things. The voice arrived at the same time every morning without exception, She was writing a letter addressed to his company, and he was the reason she had not received a response. On the 10th morning, she was reading the 4th draft aloud when she heard it. 1 knock. From the other side of the wall, she set the paper down, knocked back, once. 2 knocks came in return. She stood still and worked through it. 1 knock is yes. 2 knocks is no. 1 knock. You've been hearing me this whole time. 1 knock. She looked at the wall. Then, the 4th draft. Is it better than the 3rd? 2 knocks. I thought so. She picked up the paper, considered for a moment. If 3 knocks means keep talking, do that now. 3 knocks. She did not smile exactly, but something in her face settled into something it hadn't been before. Okay, she said. I'll keep talking. On day 12, she left a small notebook outside the loading dock door, spiral bound, blue cover, pen clipped to the front. Set it down without knocking. Went back to work. On day 13, it was outside her door. She opened it. 1 line. Handwritten English, careful and slightly uneven. The deliberate writing of someone working slowly, with effort, hands not yet fully cooperating. The letter about the rent. I heard it. All 3 drafts. She stood in the hallway for a long time. Not angry. Something more complicated. The specific discomfort of realizing you have been witnessed when you were certain you were alone. That the words you gave to an empty room had, in fact, landed somewhere. She turned to the next page, wrote 1 line. Then you know it needs a 4th draft. She had been leaving 1 portion outside his door since day 3, without announcement, without decision. She was making food anyway. The math required no discussion. On day 14, she left 2 portions. She knocked once, said to the door, I don't know if you eat alone because you want to. She did not wait for a response. The next morning, both plates were outside her door, both clean. In the notebook, 2 lines beneath hers. I don't know how to do it any other way. She read it twice, turned the page, wrote, Neither did I, before Nina. On day 15, the notebook came back with a question she hadn't expected, the scholarship, the nursing program, is it still available? She stood in the hallway with the notebook in both hands for longer than she had stood there before. Then she went inside. She wrote, I don't know. I stopped looking. That evening, without explanation, the notebook came back under the door with 1 line. It's still available. Application deadline is March 14th. She put the notebook down on the prep counter and looked at it for a long time. She did not ask how he knew. She understood by now that there were things he knew, because he made it his business to know them, and that the question of how was less important than the question of what it meant that he had looked. She turned to the next page. She wrote, Why did you look that up? The next morning. Because you said you stopped looking. That's different from the door being closed. Outside, Chicago was running at full speed. Trucks, traffic, the compressed noise of a city with no interest in conversations happening inside its walls. Inside Prep Room B, the radio played something quiet. Simone closed the notebook and picked up her knife and went back to what needed to be done. On the other side of the wall, a man who had spent years learning to need nothing from anyone held a notebook with 8 sentences in it. 5 of them were hers. 3 of them were the most honest things he had written since he was 19 years old, and still believed honesty was something that could be afforded. He did not put it down. What Simone did not know, could not have known, was that in 6 days, someone else would find out about the wall, about the voice, about the notebook, and that information, in the wrong hands, would make her the most dangerous variable in a situation she had never chosen to enter. Saturday was the day Nina ran the market. She knew the vendors by name. She knew which ones offered samples, and which ones pretended not to have any. She knew the big scale behind Simone's counter was her chair. And she knew the fish at the end of the rows smelled worse than the fish at the beginning. and she had a theory about why that she had shared with everyone in the building at least twice. Day 18 fell on a Saturday. Simone knew something was wrong before she reached the loading dock door. The notebook was outside where she'd left it. When she opened it, blank. Nothing since his last entry, 2 days ago. She knocked, soft, the way they'd settled into. No response, not even the wall. She pushed the door open. Do-hyun was on the cot with the specific stillness of someone whose body had stopped arguing and started simply enduring. The room was warmer than it should have been. She pressed the back of her hand to his forehead, the calibration of a person who had checked a child's temperature enough times that she no longer needed a thermometer to know. He was running a fever. Hi. She called Minsu. The physician needs to come earlier. He's on his way. How far? 2 hours. She looked at the man on the cot. Faster. She went back to work because the orders did not pause for this, and because her hands needed to be doing something her mind wasn't. Nina disappeared at 10:23 in the morning. 1 minute she was on the scale, explaining to the woman at the next stall why certain fish had what she called sad faces. The next minute the scale was empty. Simone put the knife down. 7 minutes. She covered the full market, every stall, the cold room, the storage area near the front. The vendors near the entrance hadn't seen her go out. The service hallway door was open. The hinge had been sticking for months, never closed fully unless you pushed it hard. Nina knew how doors worked. An open door was an available door. Simone went down the hallway. She stopped in the doorway of the loading dock room. Nina was sitting on the floor beside the cot. Close, within arm's reach, her rabbit in her lap, her back straight. She was singing. Not something from the radio. Not a song from her books. The song Simone's grandmothers had sung that Simone sang to Nina every night before sleep. An old thing, passed from one voice to another for longer than anyone had thought to track. Nina had come in and seen the man on the cot. He had looked the way she looked when she was sick enough to need someone close. She knew this feeling from the inside. The solution was not complicated. You stayed. You made the room less quiet. Her voice was small and not always on pitch. It filled the dark room anyway, the way a single candle fills darkness. Not by eliminating it, by making it into something that could be sat with. Simone stood in the doorway and did not go in. On the cot, Do-hyun lay still, eyes closed. But something moved on his face in those minutes, in the deep registers, below the controlled surface he had held, even through fever and 18 days in a room smaller than most people's kitchens. Something that had been locked for a very long time shifted. The way the surface of water shifts when something below it moves. It was not the fever breaking, booze. After what Alec, the physician, would come and confirm the temperature had dropped, and would attribute it to the natural progression of the body's response, and would mark it in his notes as a positive development without attaching a cause. But Simone, standing in the doorway with her hands at her sides, understood that something had happened, in this room that the physician's notes would not capture. She had watched enough things be kept alive. Cuts, animals, businesses. Her own forward momentum on mornings when forward felt like the wrong direction, to recognize the specific quality of something finding its hold. Nina's voice in the dark, the old song, slightly off pitch, entirely without self-consciousness. A 4-year-old who had walked through a door because it was open and had decided, with the complete clarity of someone who has not yet learned to complicate simple things, that the solution to a person being cold and alone and too quiet was to stay and to sing. Simone saw it. She did not go in. The physician arrived 40 minutes later. He checked the temperature, checked the wound, looked up with the expression of someone whose data did not match his model. Fever broke, faster than I'd expect. Simone looked at Nina, who was already explaining to him the medical benefits of singing, citing as her primary evidence the fact that it had just worked. She did not offer an alternative explanation. After the physician left, the three of them remained. Do-hyun was conscious, eyes open, more present than he had been that morning. The fever had taken something with it when it went, and what was left was cleaner. Nina looked at him with the direct assessment of a child who has made a determination and sees no reason to revise it. Are you better? His voice was rough. Better than this morning, because I sang. Not a question, a confirmed diagnosis, because you sang. She nodded, satisfied, the way she was satisfied when the world behaved according to her understanding of it. Then she pointed at the tattoo running up his left forearm, the dragon, dark and dense, coiling from wrist toward elbow. What's his name? He doesn't have one. Nina looked genuinely concerned. Everything needs a name. She studied the design for a moment with the focused attention she gave to problems that required solving. Dark cloud, because he looks sad. Something moved on Do-hyun's face. Not a smile, or not only that, the expression of a man arriving somewhere he had not planned to arrive, and finding it, against all expectation, less hostile than the place he had come from. Dark cloud, he repeated. Yes, Nina was settled. Now he has one. A vendor called Nina's name from somewhere in the market. She left at a run, rabbit under one arm, already composing whatever she was going to say next. Simone stayed. She stood near the door. He was on the cot. In the quiet Nina left behind, the room became what it had been underneath the whole time. She's not afraid of anything, he said. She hasn't learned yet. A pause. I hope she doesn't. He looked at her. What do you tell her? At night. Everything. Nothing important. I know. He held her gaze steadily. 18 mornings, not 10. 18, which meant he had been listening from the very first day, before the system of knocks, before the notebook, before she had any reason to believe anyone was there. She sat with that information. With that information. Let it settle into its actual shape. You heard all of it. Yes, including the letter. All 4 drafts. She nodded once, not angry. Something more precise than angry. The specific recalibration of a person who has understood that the last 18 mornings were something different from what she thought they were. He watched her absorb it. The whole architecture of it. Every morning she had spoken into what she believed was empty air, was every word that had arrived on the other side of the wall as something other than nothing. She did not look away. She did not reach for a softer version of her face. She stood there and let the understanding find its correct shape and held it. The scholarship question, she said. Day 15. Yes. You looked it up from a phone in a room with no light and 3 bullets worth of recovery still underway. Yes. She was quiet for a moment, not weighing it, absorbing it, the way she absorbed things, fast, complete, without making him watch her do it. That's a strange thing for a man like you to prioritize. He looked at her. I've had 18 mornings to understand what I was prioritizing. Outside, the market continued in its indifferent, necessary way. Views. Inside this room, a 4-year-old had walked through a door because nobody had told her it was supposed to stay closed. That gap, the space in her understanding where caution had not yet grown in, had done in 40 minutes what 3 weeks of careful management had not. There were things in this world that couldn't be planned for. Nina Holloway was one of them. And the man on the cot, who had built an entire architecture of control around every variable he had ever encountered, was only now beginning to understand what it meant to be standing in the presence of one that didn't have a category. Not useful, not dangerous, not a lever or a liability or a piece in an equation he was solving, something else. Something for which he did not, as yet, have a word, and which he was, for the first time in as long as he could recall, not attempting to immediately name. By day 21, Do-hyun had rebuilt most of the picture, not from surveillance, not from the resources he would normally have drawn on. From a phone the size of his palm, and 18 years of understanding how information moved, and where it stopped moving when someone needed it to stop. 3 weeks in a room. This size was, among other things, a significant amount of uninterrupted time to think. Min-soo came at noon. Do-hyun asked him to leave the door open. Simone was in prep room B. He knew her schedule the way he knew most things now, not from planning, but from repetition. She was working the afternoon orders. She would be there for another 40 minutes. Min-soo sat. He began his report in Korean. In English, Do-hyun said. A pause that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. Then Min-soo adjusted. The report was thorough, internally consistent. It distributed responsibility across 3 people, 2 of whom were no longer available to confirm or deny anything. Do-hyun listened without interrupting. Cho Young-sik, he said when Min-soo finished. You didn't mention him. He wasn't central to. He gave you the location. Silence. Cho died 17 days after the shooting. Respiratory failure, no prior history. The signature on his medical assessment is not the signature of the physician listed. A pause. I have the document. I've had 21 days to look at it. Min-soo was still. Victor Liang purchased Cho 14 months ago. Cho gave you the location and the security assessment for the Brayburn. You reduced the detail to 2 men because 2 men was what the intelligence justified. You didn't know the intelligence was designed to justify exactly that. The room held the specific weight of something being understood for the first time. You were used, Duhain said. Not turned. Used. That distinction matters. To the council and to me. Min-soo looked at the floor. When he looked up, the thing that had been rigid for 3 weeks had found its correct shape. Not relief. Something older and quieter than relief. What do you need? Tonight. Everything, right now. Nothing. Min-soo left. From the other side of the wall came the sound of a knife finding its line. Steady. Uninterrupted. She had heard all of it and kept working. He had counted on that. Liang's men came at 3:47 that afternoon. Nina was at school. Simone was alone at the counter finishing the day's last prep. She registered them before she saw them. The particular way the air in a space changes when people enter with a purpose they are choosing not to show. 3 men. They passed every other stall without slowing. They came directly to Holloway's fresh cut. The one in front placed both hands flat on the counter. Relaxed. Almost friendly. You run this stall? 6 years. Notice anything unusual lately? Around the service area, the loading dock? Simone set her knife down. Slowly, the way she set things down when she needed her hands visible and still. Market's busy, she said. I don't pay attention to what's not my station. They stayed 4 minutes, looking at the space, looking at her, looking at the hallway door that led to the loading area. Then they left. She waited until they cleared the entrance. Then she called the only number she had. Min-soo arrived in 6 minutes. The men were gone in 9. Do-hyun knew within 4 minutes of her call. The loading dock door opened at 4:11 p.m. Simone had her back to it, restacking the cold case. She heard the specific creak of that hinge, the one she had been hearing for 6 years, and turned around. Do-hyun was in the doorway, standing. For the first time since day 1, he was pale in a way that had nothing to do with the room's light, and he was moving with the careful deliberateness of a man who had been monitoring his body's current limitations and was working precisely within them. His hand was on the was door frame. The knuckles had changed color. She looked at him. You shouldn't be standing. I know. You're standing because of what happened this afternoon. He didn't answer. That was the answer. She pulled the nearest stool from behind the counter, placed it in front of him. He crossed the room and sat, not because she had offered it, but because his body and his will had been negotiating since the hallway, and this was the arrangement they had reached. She went back to the cold case. He sat in prep room B and watched her work. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then, they'll come back. I know. Not to ask questions next time, I figured. Her hands didn't slow. Nina gets out at 3:15 tomorrow. She won't go home tomorrow. She'll go somewhere safe until this is finished. Simone's hands paused, just briefly, then continued. How long? Days, not weeks. Shh. She nodded, the nod that absorbed information without debating it. He had watched her do this for 21 mornings. He understood now what it actually was. not acceptance. The practical economy of someone who had learned that energy spent arguing with what couldn't be changed was energy taken from what could. Who owns this building? She was still facing the case when she asked it. Quiet, precise, a pause. KCP Management. She turned around. KCP Management belongs to Kang Capital. She looked at him. Several things crossed her face in sequence, too fast to name individually. You owned the market. Yes. The letters. All 4 of them. Yes. You issued the rent increase. My company issued it. He stopped. Started again with the effort of someone choosing honesty over the cleaner version. I don't read individual tenant correspondence. There are people who handle that. I should have read yours. She looked at him for a long time. Then she took off her apron, folded it once, set it on the counter the way she set things down when she was finished with them. I need some air. Hmm? She walked out through the market, past the stalls, past the vendors calling across the aisles, past everything she had worked among for 6 years, with the composure of a woman who had decided long ago that falling apart was something done at home, in private, on her own time, when everything essential was already secured. She had not been seen falling apart once in 6 years. Do-hyun remained on the stool in Prep Room B. He watched her move through the market until she was gone from his sightline, a woman walking through the building that bore his company's name on every document she had ever signed. Having just learned the full shape of the irony she had been living inside, without breaking stride. He had spent 21 days, 3 weeks, and 4 drafts of a letter learning what she was. That walk was the clearest version yet. The particular dignity of it. Not performance, not pride, but the simple physical expression of someone who had decided that the world was not going to see her stumble. Not because she was invulnerable, but because she was not going to give it that. She walked the way her hands worked, without waste, without announcement, with the focused efficiency of a person who had long since accepted that the only resource she could truly count on was herself. He sat with that for a long time. What he did not know, the one variable he had not calculated in all of that time, was that she would come back. Victor Liang was taken at the Canal Port Freight Terminal at 3:17 in the morning. Simone learned this later, in pieces, over days. The way she learned most things about that world, not through direct report, but through inference, through the way information arrived in fragments, and assembled itself if you were patient enough to wait. Liang had miscalculated several things. The speed of Do-hyun's recovery, the depth of the council relationships that had held while everyone assumed the Basgos was finished, and, most critically, the particular motivated clarity of a man who had spent 21 days in a small room with nothing but a wall and a voice, and enough time to understand exactly what he was fighting his way back toward. Minsu stood before the council, not as a man defending himself, but as a man presenting a complete accounting. The intelligence chain, the source, the document with the wrong signature. The council reached its conclusion in 40 minutes. The record, they said, was corrected. It was a small phrase for what it contained. Balak. Minsu had stood in that room and laid down 15 years of loyalty, and the specific humiliation of having been used against the person he was meant to protect, and the council had weighed it and returned a verdict that was not mercy, but accuracy. The distinction was important. Do-hyun had made sure the distinction was in the record. At 5:07 in the morning, 3 days after Liang was taken, someone knocked on the prep room B door. Soft, 3 knocks. She knew the rhythm. She opened it. Do-hyun was standing in the service hallway, upright, steady. Color returned to his face, the clothes of someone who had stopped recovering and resumed being himself. She didn't fully know what that looked like yet. She was still learning. It's done, he said. I know. The hallway at 5 a.m. had a quality particular to itself. Not quite night, not yet morning. The city was outside doing what the city always did. Inside, the building held its specific quiet. The wall, she said. I'm going to think about the wall for a long time. So will I. He extended the blue spiral notebook toward her, worn at the corners now, the pen long since lost. She took it. He did not ask her to open it there. She didn't. 2 entries near the back, he said. She nodded. Then, you should have read the letters. Yes, all 4 of them. Yes, a pause. Not evasion. Wait, I should have. I won't tell you I had a reason that justifies it. I didn't read them. She looked at him for a moment. Then she stepped back inside. He stayed in the doorway, not entering, not retreating. The position of a man who had learned not to cross thresholds uninvited and who was slowly learning that some invitations don't arrive in the form he was trained to recognize. Good night, she said. Good night. She listened to his footsteps recede down the hallway. Then she opened the notebook to the back pages. His handwriting. Careful, slightly uneven. The hand of someone who had written with effort. I heard all of it, and below that, smaller, like something that had taken longer to arrive than everything else. Thank you for talking. She stood in prep room B at 5:14 in the morning, with the notebook in both hands, and did not move for a long time. She thought about day 4, and the grandmother, and the hands. She thought about day 6, and the scholarship in the drawer. She thought about the fish and Neba's astronomy and 18 mornings she had believed were going nowhere. Arriving, instead, at a man who had held on to them in the dark. The way you hold on to the one thing above water when everything else has gone under. She thought about what it meant to be heard by someone who had never told you they were listening. She put the notebook in her apron pocket. She picked up her knife. She went back to work, because the morning orders did not pause, and because that was what she did. She went back to work, but something in the room was different from the previous morning. Not dramatically. The lights were the same, and the cold case hummed its same note, and the radio played its quiet jazz. The difference was more fundamental. The specific quality of a space that had held something for a long time and has now, finally, released it into the open. 6 weeks passed. The notice from KCP management was withdrawn. A letter, brief, no explanation offered. The refrigeration system on the market's lower level was upgraded. The work order listed an anonymous contribution to the vendor association. Every stall benefited equally. No name was attached. Simone did not ask for confirmation. She noticed other things, smaller, in the weeks that followed. The building's service entrance lock, which had been inconsistent for 8 months and submitted in 2 separate maintenance requests that had gone unaddressed, was replaced with a new mechanism that functioned correctly. The halogen overhead in prep room B, which had been flickering for 6 weeks and which she had been working around by positioning herself differently in the space, was replaced one Tuesday while she was on her lunch break. She came back and stood in the doorway and looked at the even light for a moment before going in. It was Spanna, Alec. She did not mention these things to anyone. She cataloged them the way she cataloged everything. Quietly, specifically, with the understanding that accurate information was more useful than comfortable assumptions. What she did was open a letter from the Chicago Community Health Foundation, informing her she had been identified as a candidate for a nursing degree scholarship she had not known she was eligible to apply for. She investigated as far as the trail would go, which was, as it turned out, to an advisory board that included one Korean name she recognized. She did not mention the name. She called the contact. She submitted the application. 19 days later, she was accepted. She put the letter on the kitchen table where Nina could see it. Nina picked it up, looked at it with the seriousness of someone who understood this mattered even without knowing exactly why, and said, "Is this good, Mama?" "Yes," Simone said. "This is good." Nina set it back down carefully, the way she set down things that mattered. Then she went back to her drawing. A dragon, dark and detailed, with what appeared to be a small cloud above its head. She had been drawing variations of it for 3 weeks. He came on a Saturday, 10:31 in the morning. No jacket, no men, moving through the market with the economy of someone who has decided exactly where he is going before he arrives. He stopped at Holloway's fresh cut. Bone-in, short rib, the thick cut. Simone looked up. It was not on the board. She kept it for customers who knew to ask. The cut that took longer, required more precision, not the kind of thing a first-timer ordered. You know about the thick cut? Day 7. You said the day shift always got it wrong. She held his gaze for one moment. Then she turned to the case. Nina came from behind the counter at her characteristic pace, somewhere between walking and having already arrived. She stopped, looked at him, tilted her head with the focused assessment she gave to things that required proper categorization. The man from the room. The singing expert, he said. She accepted the title. Then she looked at his left forearm, at the dragon coiling from wrist to elbow, dark and detailed, and traced one edge of it carefully with her fingertip, following the line the way she followed paths in picture books. Dark cloud, she said. Dark cloud, he confirmed. Does it still hurt? Not anymore. She removed her hand, gave him the clear-eyed verdict of a completed assessment. Okay, she said, and returned to her previous business. Simone set the wrapped package on the counter. 2 portions, she said. He looked at the package, then at her. Last time I put 2 portions outside a door, she said. They both came back clean. I'm not putting them outside a door this time. He picked up the package. No declaration, no promise. She had not offered either, and he had not expected either. They were both people who had learned to mean exactly what they said, and to understand that the simplest actions sometimes carried more weight than language could manage. He picked it up. That was the answer. She would try later to locate the exact thing that had changed between them. She would not find a single moment. There was no door. There was a wall. 4 inches of drywall and old insulation in a converted warehouse building on N. Kedzie Avenue. And on one side, a woman who talked because she had stopped being afraid to fill silence, and on the other side, a man who had held onto her voice in the dark, the way you hold onto the one thing still above water when everything else has gone under. Her profession had taught her one thing above all others. You understand what something is made of by what it can bear. The bone tells you more than the surface. The deep cut tells you more than the trim. She had pressed her hands down on a stranger's wound at 4:47 in the morning and talked because that was what the moment required. She had not known she was also, in that same motion, beginning to understand what she herself was built from. Nina understand what she herself was built from. Nina was explaining something to the woman at the next, explaining with the full authority of someone who had never once doubted that her observations were worth sharing. Doyun was at the counter, watching Nina with the complete attention of a man who has nowhere else he needs to be. The market moved around them. Chicago moved beyond the walls. Both enormous, both indifferent, both entirely unconcerned with what was happening in this small and specific corner of the world. Simone picked up her coffee. She did not do the math. She did not calculate the distance between where she was and where she needed to be. She picked up her coffee and she sat down and she stayed. So, if you made it all the way here, you stayed through 18 mornings, through a wall, a notebook, and a 4-year-old who walked through a door because no one had told her it was supposed to stay closed. I want to ask you something before you go. Which moment stayed with you longest? Was it Simone pressing her hands down in the dark and just talking? Was it Nina climbing onto a stranger's chest because he was cold and she understood the way children understand things? That warmth is not something you save for later? Or was it the notebook? 2 people on opposite sides of 4 inches of drywall, learning each other in the only language the wall would carry? Leave your answer in the comments. And drop your city and your local time. I want to see exactly how far this story traveled tonight, if this moved you even a little. Like this video. It takes 1 second and it means more than you know to this channel. And if you aren't subscribed yet, now is the time. There are more stories coming, the kind that stay with you, the kind that ask something of you. The kind ask something ends, The kind that, long after the video is trying to underhands, trying to understand. This was one of those. Thank you for watching. Thank you for staying. I'll see you in the next one.